Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. You know, uh, my son moved out yesterday. He's coming back today to pick up his car, but he's essentially moved out. And I was having these, when you were a little kid and you would cry and you would uh, have those breaths, crying breaths. It's a weird breath that you would have, when like after you would cry, and like I have those things occasionally now. Things like that, like where I'm feeling something or having an emotional reaction that I'm unaware of in terms of my conscious life. Like it'll be in my dream life, or I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll be angry and not at anything specifically, but just whatever it is. And I want to talk about that in the way that the Sajmark system of meditation versus the psychological world looks at it. Because it's kind of an interesting, I don't know what you would call it, not a dichotomy. I guess a contrast. And so, I my first marriage, we had a plan, which was to have an intergenerational family farm, and I should put like air quotes around we, because my ex was sabotaging everything, and she the stuff that she was, some of the things she was more pushing or more, had a vision of that was, you know, not really having to sell it to me, but something where I didn't, it didn't come from me. Like the homeschooling, I would have never thought about doing. Like it wasn't something that I even consciously, and I wasn't capable of doing that. So there were things like that where she was very adamant about. And, was never really capable of successfully achieving anything. And so it was like something where she was going to sabotage it and was doomed to failure. But, I was all in, and the intergenerational family farm and all the things that we were trying to do. And there were issues, like there was just issues that we had all along, not just the, relationship and her mental stuff and her victim consciousness and her trauma that she suffered as a kid or whatever. Abused by her, sexually abused by her dad, and emotionally abused and physically abused by her mom. And these were very rich people, rich, educated people. Her dad was a high-level executive at a Fortune 500 company, so it was, these were not like low-life people, and she was highly educated, but the whole, trauma and the whole whatever it was, and the whatever she was as a person, and suicidal tendencies, and person who cut themselves, and all these things, where we'd get into arguments and I'd have to hide the knives and all the rest of it. So there was, she had higher developed qualities. She was, spiritual in terms of doing the Sajmark system, but also had huge psychological, whatever it was, personality things. And, so there's two things there, right? Which people have, like everyone has two things. You have your soul and you have your ego. And, a person with a fractured ego, fractured personality, who can display, higher level things at times. Someone who's got talents that's smart, people have, have these things, but, ultimately they're just broken. Like, she told me she was broken early on, and I didn't believe her, or thought that could be fixed because I had full faith in the Sajmark system, and all these things. So, we had this thing that was doomed, but the idea was that an intergenerational family farm where our kids would buy land. We had, would build a house on land that we had, and they would have their own families, but we'd have a community of people there supporting each other. And when we first started homesteading, that looked promising. And there were always signs of things could have worked out, but they never did. Too much drama, too much. It was just never going to happen. Like it was, There was just no way. Like it wasn't meant to happen. Wasn't going to happen. And we protected the kids from technology, and they had a computer for homeschooling, but they would share it, and they didn't have cell phones, and they did farm work, which they enjoyed at first, but then things started to fall apart. My ex started to have these breakdowns, and then my daughter picked up on some of those things, and she started to act out and do some of the same stuff, and do like she ended up being a cutter, cutting herself and talking about suicide herself. She eventually would kill herself, which was the whole thing, right? And so everything was kind of like going south, and we went to India with this idea that we needed community, and with community support, maybe we could build this sort of thing that we were doing, a community of people, and people who were doing the spiritual practice, but also wanted to have some sort of like homeschooling, homesteading type situation. But living in India is not really an option. It takes 12, 13 years to become a citizen there, and it's extraordinarily hard to do that. Like it's just, you have to learn a language, an Indian language that's not English, so you have to, learn Hindi or what are these things. And you have to, all these things you have to do. They make it hard to become a citizen. You really can't own land. It's just a whole thing. And it's, India, right? It's like it's difficulty. There's a lot of difficulties. And the idea that we had this, information that was valuable based on what we had tried, what we had worked on. And, I talked about this extensively in the Journey series. This will also be in the Journey series. And, it was going to be like I just wanted to present it to Kamlesh, who was going to be the next master of the system. Sharji was pretty much incapacitated. He had like a couple of different kinds of cancers, and he was just, he was physically just breaking down. And his time was over. So Kamlesh, who I respected and thought was a good preceptor in Abhyasi and, whatever, he had bought a farm, which we found out had he had an organic farm next to the school for this, whatever it was. And, I thought, well, we'll see if there's any what we've done has any value. It's had value here. It ended up having value here for people. The knowledge that I had gotten, the experiences I had gone through, the insights that I've had from doing all the stuff that we did. The whole thing was valuable to me here. For you all, at least some people. But, what it made me into, but had no value to them. We had this bad meeting with Kamlesh, and, we came out of it. My ex ended up feeling like, she had to blame somebody, so if she blamed me, she couldn't blame Kamlesh, the next master of the system, who was just a fucking turd. Like, turned out to be a piece of shit, so it didn't matter. It was never going to happen because of the guy. And he's now building schools and fucking... He's got a big farm areas and acreage, all these things that I presented to him, but he, whatever. So it was whatever it was. And things just went south. My ex was just falling apart. And so, my kids were all into technology now. They're around other kids, in terms of, we were at the ashram in India, and it was just, all the kids were had cell phones, all that kind of shit. And so it was clear that I had to reinvent family life, which is tough. I was in my 50s, and that everything was going to be different. And it was kind of, going through a divorce, and my ex sort of, turned everybody against me in the organizations, which was, and all these things ended up being gifts for me. Made it easier for everything that, when it went down, when Kamlesh turned out to be a piece of shit. And I talked about this if you go back to the most recent Journey series, and I have all these Journey series in the members thing, and so there was all that, and at some point I realized that my kids just were going to have to just, there was intergenerational family farm was done, and so then there was these other events. We got back to America after 3 years, and I was overwhelmed with all I had to do. And my two older kids went to visit my ex, and they didn't come back. And it was a bummer, but also a relief. And then, I had the two younger kids, and they went to visit my ex, and there were a couple of days at the end. It looked like they might not come back. And I kind of wanted to protect them all from it, whatever. But the whole thing, I was just kind of, I was going through stuff with the YouTube channel at that time, and adjusting to life in America. And when my kids left, I had there at one point we had 6 kids. My ex had 2 from a previous marriage, and so there's 8 people. And I cooked a lot of the meals. And, I was cooking for lots of people. I mean, I had just been cooking for 5 people, and I usually would make enough for leftovers for a lunch or something, whatever. And so, like, I cooked chili, and my kids were gone, and it was enough for, like, I could never eat. You know what I mean? Like, it was just, all my, I had these recipes of things in my head, and I was making them for lots of people. And I'm sitting there by myself, and, for, like, I don't know, was extended visit. Like, it was maybe like 10 days. And I was like, what am I going to do? It's this whole empty nest syndrome. So much of my life had been about, centering on the kids and, preparing them for their future and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, this is going to be weird, being by myself, and just living a life like I hadn't done that in years. And, there'd been so much stress and whatever. I mean, so much like craziness. And so the 2 kids came back, the 2 younger kids. And then we went camping we went to the redwood forest. We're in the sequoia forest. And I had, there was some interest from, various women from the YouTube channel about relationships, but a lot of them were like in their late 30s. They were much younger than me, and there just wasn't. I mean, just there was this sense that I didn't want to marry a crazy person. When I came back to America, there was a woman that was we dated, and she had similar things to my ex, and I'm like, I just can't do that again. Like, I was just tapped out. Like, I'm not going to go through another fucking crazy relationship. Like, I just, if that's my some scar is my destiny to marry crazy women, I'm not then I'm not doing that again. I can't, so I'm just, whatever it was. And, I kind of thought that most of the women who probably were good wives were still married. Like it was, I mean, majority. It was hard to find somebody. People are probably single for a reason. They want to be single, or they're just, I mean, especially, women could just find somebody to marry. It's not as hard to. I mean, I guess men can do that too, but women who are good wives, who are good in relationships are able to just especially as you get older. There's just so few people who are good at being in relationships, right? Almost everybody sucks at it, and so if you're good at it, especially a woman who's has more natural innate relationship skills. So I was wondering what was going to happen, and my kids went off. We were this happened. We also had gone to the Grand Canyon, but I was this specifically happened here at so not here, but there at we were at the Sequoia Park, and I'm building a campfire, and my kids are just off, doing their thing. They played they developed this game as children, and I guess they evolved over time, in their teenager years, but they're just walking around being teenagers, and I'm sitting there making a fire, and I'm like, they're going to leave at some point, whether they weren't going to go live with my ex, but whatever they were going to do, they were going to leave, and I was going to be alone, and there was going to be no intergenerational family farm, and what am I going to do? Like, what am I going to do with my time? And I'm going to. I mean, I'm a loner and an isolationist, and I'm like, what, and it was that time that I met my wife now. It was like a, thing that was, we had maybe interacted a little bit already, but, which worked out great. And it was, she's just, perfect for me. And just, wonderful. So there was that moment though, I'm making the fire and I'm like, what's going to happen, right? Because they're going to be gone in like 3. I mean, this is whatever it is. And so got together with my wife now, and then there was this. I'm talking about these things that were like watershed moments, or big moments that of realization of this idea of the kids leaving. And so we were building a farm again, and so which I didn't anticipate happening so soon, and there was some thought that my kids would, there might be still some hope for at least 2 of these kids to be the intergenerational family farm. My daughter Anna committed suicide. She was living, where my ex was, and I later found out she was on LSD, and somebody gave her a gun, and like I couldn't fucking believe that was, well, whatever that was. I mean, crazy. That somebody would do that because she was an unstable person and very highly emotional, and she had those tendencies she inherited from her mom. There's mental illness that ran in my ex's family. Just both her mom and her dad, and issues, people on medication and stuff, psychological, other siblings, and my ex had been institutionalized. She had tried to commit suicide after a Thanksgiving Day, thing where she was abused by her dad when she was 18. She came back from college, and multiple psychological issues. I think she got hospitalized twice, or went to a psych ward, this kind of thing. And so, anyways, there was a time where my wife and I went on vacation by ourselves, and I realized, oh my God, so great not to have the kids here. I'd always hoped that we'd have close relationship, but it just never materialized. My kids were resistant to the anti-vaccine talk. They were resistant to truther stuff for the most part, and they just weren't. You know, they clearly weren't. They didn't like the farming. They had said at some point they'd like to live on a farm again, but then when it happened, they just weren't into it, and they were unpleasant to be around. I mean, they're just they're different, and they had their own lives and their own whatever, and they weren't. We didn't have very much in common. They rejected and rebelled against a bunch of the family stuff, the truther stuff. There's a time where in India where there we had the flood, and my kids just shined. My kids were prepared for shit like that, and they just we were in kind of desperate situation for over a week, and my neighbors who we became close with were saying how great my kids were for so I always had hope that these things would eventually kick in, the Sajmark stuff, right? But then, at some point, you realize it's not. It's just the kids were going to go, and they were different people with different lives, and and I was just let it go. I'm like, I mean, the thing just died a slow death. The whole whatever. It died, a death in India years ago in 2014, 13, 14, 15, when the separation, divorce happened, and then along the line it just was I always had hoped my kids were going to be better spiritually. That was one of the ideas were that that Master Charji, the third master of the system, had said that the souls that these these kids, these souls that were born into Abhyasi families. Abhyasi is what someone's called who does it means spiritual aspirin in Sanskrit, and it's what people are called to do the meditation, the Sajmark meditation. And he had said that these kids that are being born into these families were choosing the families because of the meditation, right? Because they want to be a part of this. Which in India, maybe more so. But, we always choose our parents. So there's that. There's a whole thing. There was this book that this kid came out where this guy interviewed a lot of legitimate mediums and psychics, and they all kind of had a similar story where your soul has you have this soul family, and you come together after you die, and you have your these souls that sort of that you incarnate with often, or are around you when you're incarnated in these things. And you process your life, and then you choose your next destination. It's part of the Sajmark philosophy and these things, and the ancient yogic philosophy, understanding that what goes into an incarnation, and choosing the right location. And Charji also said this thing. There's a book called Fruit of the Tree, and he talked about how that there aren't a lot of good places, good families for higher developed souls to be born into. There's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of people who are educated and have money, but they're not spiritual. Oftentimes, people who are educated and have money are, atheists, or, whatever it is. They're not really into God. And, there's people who aren't as developed intellectually, who are maybe more religious, but they're not, not the best genetic stock for a higher developed soul. And so spiritual people who generally don't have kids, a lot of them, and oftentimes you have religions where people have spiritual tendencies, take a vow of celibacy, like in, Catholicism and some of these other religions, and they just tend not to have kids, or not a lot of them, because they're, not materialistic, and they're more into their spiritual path and whatever. So he said that having as many kids as possible and letting nature decide, and inviting these higher developed souls into your life is a great thing you can do. It's one of the ways you can make the world a better place, by being, having higher developed souls come into incarnate. And, the idea was, and I had spiritual experiences of the kids when they were being born, before they were born in some cases, of the nature of their soul. And I had every reason to believe this was totally true in our case, and it wasn't. I mean, maybe it was true, just it didn't pan out. I don't know what it is, right? I can't say, I can't explain it. But we used to have these spiritual gatherings in Molina, Georgia, at this ashram. And there were these kids that grew up in the mission, and they would put on a play. They would do some kind of performances. The Indian kids would do some Indian dance sometimes. Some people, there was some kind of like a talent show, and Charji would watch it. And these kids just seemed all like really cool. Like, I was working in a treatment center with the dregs of society. So when I started doing the meditation, I had my first job with these kids who were termed sexually reactive, but they were basically little sex offenders. And they were like fucking going nowhere. They were going to be institutionalized pretty much the rest of their lives. They were going to have bad lives of crime and institutional, being in prison or mental institutions. And, very few of them were going to go have any kind of thing that would resemble a good life. And they were just the dregs. There's no worse population than pedophiles, right? Even the prisoners hate them. Like, you're the worst of the worst when you're in that kind of situation. And so I was working with these kids, and then I was seeing these kids at these gatherings, and, there's other things too. There's like little regional gatherings and things. So, I saw these kids, and I'm like, wow, I hope my kids are like that. They're into the, of course I wasn't married yet in the beginning. And then, seeing these kids grow up, and I just thought all of them would be better than their parents at doing the Sajmarg meditation. And that didn't turn out to be the case at fucking all. Especially the non-Indian kids, but even the Indian kids. And a lot of them were fucking just brats and shitty people. I mean, they turned out to be like shitty people, right? Which I was kind of stunned. And then when it turned, when my kids, grew up, it was clear they wanted no part of it, which was a fucking massive letdown, and I didn't live my life. I didn't become a parent so my kids would live vicariously through me, right? Like, I'd never push my kids to be this or that. I'd hoped, and I gave my preferences and whatever, but I knew that they were going to turn out whatever way they turned out. But I just assumed naturally, because they chose to be born in this family, and that, Sajmarg was the major, thing in our lives, and they were around so much of it and spent so much time in India. But these kids just don't, they're not into it. And, this whole thing about indigo kids, all this stuff, that there's these kids that are being born that spiritual tendencies. But it became clear that my kids were just not going to be into this. And if they were, they would never be, into it as much as I am, and they weren't going to surpass me, which was kind of a bummer, because I just took that for granted as a reality. they all started the practice and they all benefited, but then just, really didn't stick with it. My son ended up starting to meditate on his own, but he didn't want anything to do with what was then called heartfulness. Of course, heartfulness fell apart. There was an opportunity when, my wife and I got together, that there was a local preceptor, one of the really good people, like really nice guys, one of the nicest people that's not an Indian. Like a lot of the Indians are really nice, but the Americans were often, they were like crazy boomer hippie kind of people that were, they were okay. They were okay, but they were, oftentimes difficult. This guy was one of my favorite, people in the mission. And he ended up spying on me and my new wife for my ex. And so, there was a chance that we could all go to meditation together, my two younger kids and my wife, go to group meditation. And it just fucking, the whole thing fell apart. It was like, and then I realized that Dodgy was a piece of shit. So there really wasn't anything for my kids because, they're going to be in a mission that's corrupt and like turned into a cult. So there's just, so I let it all go, right? This was just, I thought something was going to happen and it happened. But the exact opposite happened. And the exact opposite was fucking kind of a nightmare and just whatever. And so when my wife and I went on vacation and I realized it was so much better without my kids, my son took the car and drove a couple hours to a different state. She had become friends with my daughter Anna's ex-boyfriend and went to hang out with him. And he took the car and without permission. It was a car that I had bought when we got back from India, and I picked my kids up at the airport when they came back from my ex's. And it just had some sentimental value. We went, we traveled around, did a lot of things together in that area, going to different places in the western part of the country, Grand Canyon, and places in Utah and Arizona. And so it was it was kind of symbolic in some way. And he totaled the car and, kids do shit like that. So I wasn't like, it was just, but it was sucky. And then my daughter had kind of a meltdown, which was actually worse. And I realized that it was just time, and this was just going to be a shitty family. Like my family was, there was, not going to be much of a relationship there. And it was just, it was time for me to be able to just live my own life with my wife and just do what we were going to do. This thing where you're just ready for your kids to leave and go out and do their thing. And, I just had this final piece to get them out of the house and go, live their own lives. It was just obvious it was time. And my daughter left a short time, maybe within a year, kind of in a negative way, which it was a whole thing. And then there was just my son here, and, it looked like it was going to be tougher for him to leave. And then I got this sort of devastating news, which was just a fucking bummer, which I was really bad, and I was fucking bummed. And then it was like, all right, well, we got to expedite this. And, I did this 7 sittings in 7 days before a gathering, there are these online gatherings for Gratefullness. And he ended up getting a job, and it worked out great. He excelled at it. And it just, he got motivated. He bought a little car, and he just, he just stepped up, and he's, and then, a couple weeks ago, he said that he's ready to move out. He has a place. He's going to house sit for a while, whatever it is. And, it was mostly a sense of relief. I mean, I didn't really have very many negative feelings about the whole thing because it was just meant to be, and I accepted it. Like, it didn't go the way that I probably, almost as bad as it could have been. I mean, when you lose a kid to suicide, your family's fucking wrecked. I mean, you can't, it's just, I mean, there's nothing to say about it. I'm not close with any of my kids, and, there's just, I don't know. There's not much of a future, a very superficial one at best. I mean, I don't do well with superficial stuff, so. But for the most part, I've accepted it for what it was, and grateful for, it helped to make me into a better person, the whole thing. It helped me in some way spiritually. I don't know what the family did for the kids, but, they all out on their own now. They're all able to make their way through the world, have their own lives. I mean, one thing I'm aware of, when you become a parent, you put an investment into your children, and you don't think about it that way when you're doing it. But I changed diapers for like 10 fucking years, and I made so many meals, and the farming stuff, the farming experience they had, and you know having them, putting effort into making them have happy birthdays and all those kind of things, and all the adventures, hikes, and traveling and things. Difficult. It took a lot of my life's energy. A lot of my life energy went into that, and there was probably zero awareness of that. I don't think they ever appreciated me making meals or any of these types of things. And not that I feel like a victim or anything like that, but there's no gratitude for any of that stuff. And I'm a gratitude person, and that's kind of, I guess, a blessing. Making it easier for this stuff, because it's sad. Your kids move out, they're sad. But I did have I had been going through this tooth infection, and whatever, this is post gathering. There was the Chargy birthday gathering. There's a second and third master. Babaji's birthday is in April 30th. Chargy's in July 24th. And it was like this period of time where my son got his job right at that one gathering, which I felt, was not an accident. And then he ended up moving out, post the gathering here with Chargy and then all this stuff. But I've been having like some level of waking up in the night a little bit panicked, or all of a sudden I feel panicked. And then I've been having these crying breaths, right? Where like I'm crying on the inside. And this happens occasionally, like I said, where I'm feeling some sort of emotions and I'm detached from them. And, when I started doing my Sajmarg meditation, I worked in the treatment center, and then I will later go back and get my master's in counseling. So I worked in the counseling field. I majored in psychology, and I got a degree in human services in my undergraduate, and then I took a kind of master's in counseling. And I was well versed. I was a preceptor and was well versed in the Sajmarg system as I studied all the different counseling models and theories. And there is a big difference in the Sajmarg philosophy than there is in the psychological world. People would, back when I talked about heartfulness, before I knew Daji was a piece of shit, Sajmarg is what I did. That Sajmarg means the natural path. And then Daji turned the thing into what was called heartfulness, which was, a cultish-like thing that he controlled. And a lot of people would call it mindfulness. They would say what I was doing was mindfulness, because everyone's heard of mindfulness. And I would tell people, mindfulness is the exact opposite of what Sajmarg is. Because, mindfulness goes along with the psychological models. And the psychological models, they would call what Sajmarg does as you're repressing things you need to talk about, right? So you go into a counseling situation, and there are things that you are trying to deal with, right? You're blocking those things out. You're not wanting to be conscious of them. Like somebody brings something up and you're like, shut up, and you just, like your eyes glass over. It's like when you're talking to a sheeple about truth or stuff, and they just disassociate, and their eyes glaze over, and they don't want any part of you, and you're like, you're kind of stunned that there's this like wall between you. And so there are people who, you have issues. If you have trauma from when you were a young kid, you have these things, and it's too painful for you to deal with maybe when you were a kid, or you couldn't conceptualize it. You come from a shitty family, or just there's some shitty things happen to you, and when you have these, like someone like Donald Trump, who has these narcissistic wounds or whatever, and insecurities, and masks them over with narcissism, but really is a fragile person inside because of the, whatever, the ego, whatever has happened. And in counseling, you're supposed to pull those things to the surface. You're supposed to process them with a therapist or whatever you're doing. And then, learn to master them, right? The underlying issues, but because of, your alcoholism and your addictions and your abusive behaviors or your victim behaviors or whatever it is, confronting those things and then processing them and healing and all the things, right? Like most of you guys know what the counseling model is, the psychological models. And if you don't deal with those things, you're repressing them, and there are things inside of you that have to come out. But when I learned from when I worked with sex offenders and abuse, that when you deal with people who have been victimized, if you pull the stuff up to the surface, there's a chance that they can be re-traumatized. In fact, not a chance, it's going to happen to some extent. That the trauma is going to come back out, and you're supposed to be able to help them process the trauma that they couldn't experience when they were a kid as an adult, right? And this goes along with mindfulness meditation, which is about being very mindful about everything. Not like not drifting off and going into a meditative state, and when you're doing your work or driving or washing the dishes, just focusing on doing the dishes. Like, be very mindful of everything you're doing. Be mindful of your surroundings and your physical body and these things. In the Sajmark system, it's the exact opposite. You meditate and you forget about your body. Like, you have a spiritual side, and for the time that you meditate and the time that you do cleaning, you forget about your body, you forget about your whatever it is, and you focus on God. And also, when you're doing your work and you're doing everything else, you focus on God. You have this thought that God's doing the work and not you, and you're having this this process they call constant remembrance, and you're thinking about God and not about yourself and these petty little things. And you don't have to discuss your fucking emotions and process things and whatever. I mean, it's just whatever's natural. You're not suppressing anything, and you have these things called samskaras that come up, and they come with feelings, emotions, and they just need to be cleaned out. And you're just something that you're going through something temporarily. You don't have to re-experience it. You don't have to delve into it. You don't have to think about it and process it and all this shit. It just comes up to be cleaned off, and you let it go. You have no attachment to it. If you have an addiction, you just let it go. You don't focus on it. You don't think about it. And part of this is that the human mind in the Sajmark philosophy, there's this thing called the Kashob, the primary stir, that created the universe. And it's opposite of the Big Bang, because God does things subtly. So this idea that there was some kind of explosion that created the universe is not is disputed in the Sajmark philosophy. That God had this thought that created the universe is a primary thought, that there was nothing, and then there was this thought between this essence that is God and the nothingness that existed, the masculine and the feminine coming together, the active and the inactive, the active and the dormant, and then the universe was created. And that human beings possess this similar thought, identical to this original thought. That's why we can manifest things. And so with this infinite thought force that can be, as a person evolves spiritually, and they can use this thought force to manifest, think about all the things that human beings have manifested, right? And so if you take that thought force and you focus it on problems, you just magnify the problem. You keep on dwelling on things, and so the psychological model is about, it's problem centered. And when I went to graduate school, there was a counselor that came in, a clinician, and she did solution focused therapy, and she had done different types of, there's all these models of psychology and these models of counseling, and she was an interesting woman. Like, we all, the people in my class really liked what she had to say, and she talked about how she was just getting depressed listening to people's fucking problems, which is something that I couldn't do either. When my counseling, I'm a solution focused kind of person. And so in solution focused therapy, you define the problem in the first 2 sessions, and then you work together on solutions. And it seems like kind of a no-brainer, but that's not how psychology works. Like, it's so problem focused. Like, the whole DSM-5 is about what's wrong with you, and you're focusing on what's wrong with you and not what's right with you. In the Sajmark system, you focus on this potential saint that's in there. The masters of the system see the saint that's inside of you, the potential spiritual master that's inside of you. Someone who's mastered their lower tendencies and has embraced their spiritual nature. This, this eventual person that you can become this essence, embracing your true spiritual essence. And you're focused on that. And you're not focused on all these other bullshit things, your egotistical problems and shit like that, and your liabilities. You don't dwell on that shit. You dwell on the positive, right? You're focusing on what you can become. And these other things are just obstacles in the way that need to be eradicated. And so she talked about how, like, there was an example, solution-focused therapy. I read a book on it, and she had recommended this book. And this guy talked about a baseball player. And, they get into these things called slumps, where they can't hit the baseball, right? You guys are aware of slumps. And the guy couldn't hit the baseball, and he talked to one of his coaches, and the coach said, he went and approached his coach and see a hitting coach, and the coach said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Well, I've been watching my swing." The baseball players have a swing, and golfers have a swing, and their swing has to be, sometimes it gets fucked up, right? And he said, "I'm watching my swing." He goes, "Well, when are you watching it from?" He goes, "Well, recently when I'm not hitting." And he goes, "Well, why don't you go back and watch your swing when you were hitting?" And the guy did that, and he came out of his slump. Because you focus on the positive. You don't try to fix your problems. You focus on the solution. And it's a wonderful thing. And so, this idea that you go through life without dealing with things, right? Because, like people are in the Western culture and this New Age people, a lot of liberals, they're so focused on their feelings and their process. When I lived in Santa Fe and I went to graduate school, there's so many of these trust funders and people out there, a lot of them women, like a lot of divorced women, and they're all focused on their process. And, process is like I used to joke that process was like aloha. I'm in my process, these things, the way they use the word, and they, use the word in a way that wasn't designed to be used, right? And so, and it's so narcissistic and egotistical and so focused on my emotions and these things. And, I've learned to focus on gratitude. That's why it's called Gratefulness Meditation, which is just Saj Marg. And, I gave it a name that was appropriate, especially for me. That when you're grateful for things, the idea of the 5 stages of grief, right? Denial, bargaining, anger. I think anger comes first. I think it's denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance. Not acceptance, depression, and acceptance, right? And you go through these stages. And, I feel like it's kind of accurate. I mean, it's not a bad thing. But they miss out on gratitude, because gratitude is better than acceptance. When you're actually grateful for negative things, and in the Sajmark system, there's a maxim, there's these 10 maxims, and one of them is, there's actually 2 of them that I should talk about here. But one of them is, take miseries as divine blessings for your own good and be thankful. That's number 5. And number 7, be not revengeful for the wrongs done by others. Take them with gratitude as heavenly gifts. And so there's religious teachings about this, but there's more in-depth teachings in Saj Marg about how it benefits you spiritually. The first one is that often miseries are there to clean out your past samskaras. Miseries as divine blessings is to clean out your past samskaras so that you can evolve spiritually. And the same thing with the be not revengeful for the wrongs done by others. Take them as heavenly gifts and be thankful. It's the same thing, right? It's that when people are doing wrong things to you, it ends up helping cleaning out shit that needs to go. And when you go through these miseries and these difficult interactions, it benefits you. And once I embraced this, I experienced this, right? But it's a far cry from, standing up for yourself. And I'm not saying that you're taking these things as just, gratitude, and you're not commenting on the other people, you're not confronting them. None of these things. It's not like that. But the attitude is that this is all coming from God, that these things that are happening are coming from God. And they're for your ultimate spiritual evolution. Your soul has signed off on everything that happens to you. There's no victimization. There's no victims. And you are, you're creating your part in whatever drama and bullshit that's going on with your life. And once I embraced that, and, it's still working on it, but being grateful and focusing on gratitude, it became something that changed everything. And just focusing on when you have a complaint about somebody in your life, or like, I could complain about YouTube all day, every day, right? My channel's dying, and, I'm getting less and less views, and, I mean, the whole algorithm, whatever AI bullshit thing. I mean, I could, how unfair it is. There's all kinds of ways I could complain about things. I can always find things to complain about, how unfair life is, but when you approach it from a place of gratitude, you just feel better. And, I went through this cleaning in India when my divorce happened and all that shit. And it's like, when I came out the other end, I was just happy. Like, I was making more serotonin, and it was just wonderful. And it wasn't just about being happy, because that's not a goal of the system. But I had evolved spiritually, going through these various things. And so, I have these things that come up where I wake up angry, and I don't even know why I'm angry, right? It's just like I'm, sleeping. I wake up, and I just, dismiss it, and, whatever, clean it, have the idea of being, I'd sometimes do some cleaning, clean off whatever's there, throw it out of my system. And, or, this thing with feeling sad, having these cry breaths, right? Like, underneath, there's some sadness about my family shitting the bed. Like, it's just, it's a sucky thing to go through. And a disappointment, right? And, I'm sad on some level. And, but I just keep on chugging along and not paying attention to it, because, there's a certain detachment to the Sajmark method that's really great. And I thought I'd talk about that there. I mean, it's a sad thing. Like, my son leaving. It's just the final nail in the coffin of my family. Like, that part of my life, the middle part of my life that started when I was 32 years old, lasted now for, I don't know, almost 30 years, is, this first 29 years where I was just lost and like just, under-functioning, underachieving, just unfocused person. And then I became an Abhyasi, and then got married, and then that part's all dead, with the Sajmark turning into a heartfulness cult, and, my family shitting the bed. I mean, that was the better part of my life, the second part. And so, now I have the third act, right, or whatever. And there's, different phases. Of course, when you're a kid, you go through multiple lives, because your consciousness is always changing, as you go older. But, I've learned that, like, it's like attending to things, and, I mean, things just go away after a while. Like, it's just, you go through something. In Sajmark, it's called, you're going through a cleaning. And it sucks for whatever period of time, and then it ends, and you go through, something else happens, and you have good times and bad times, and happy times and sad times, and all these things, right? And then, it's all just kind of an illusion. It's just the illusionary aspect of being in a simulation, some sort of 3D simulation that your soul chose to be in. And that if you, lighten up about all of it, if you have feelings, like humans have feelings, and we have, emotions, and, there's things that suck right now in the world and whatever. But, it's focus on gratitude, and this is all coming from God. Is, that's been by far for me the best attitude to take on such things. And, it's, whatever. So I just thought I would talk about that a little bit. I have a dentist appointment today, follow up with the so-called holistic dentist, and then that thing's going to resolve itself. I'm pretty sure it's not infected, because I've had it for like 2 fucking months. And, there's a whole thing I'm going to talk about that when that, resolves itself. But it's like all this stuff is resolving itself, and, my family life. And, it didn't go the way I wanted it, but I just, it's the way it was supposed to go. Anyways, let's get into the other stuff here. Okay, so I got some Gavin Newsom stuff to cover here, and Tom MacDonald sucks ass. And I'll show you that. That's a Twitter thing, which I saw. I'll show you that in a moment. But here's the first part.
California Governor Gavin Newsom and his team have figured out a very entertaining way to deal with Donald Trump at his own rhetorical level. They've got a new social media strategy that is both, I got to say, pretty damn funny and I think extremely effective, mocking the president with a spot-on impression of his very weird communication style. Since Newsom jumped into the ongoing redistricting fight, his official Twitter account has been posting Trump style. Donald is finished. He is no longer hot. First the hand, so tiny, And now me, Gavin C. Newsom, have taken away his step. Many are saying we can't even do the big stairs on Air Force One anymore. Uses the little baby stairs now. Sad. Has all the Trump trademarks, all capital letters, random quotation marks, little parentheticals, complete unhinged absurdity.
So, this is the anointing of Gavin Newsom, right? This has nothing to do with the right and the left, because Gavin Newsom is now become the new Hillary Clinton to the right, which is a big thing. And he's positioned himself to be their candidate, right? Like and these guys are all anointing him. This is all this is about.
From just this morning, I thought this was a good one. I hate Kid Rock, GCN. Reference to Trump's infamous I hate Taylor Swift. Another drags the vice president into it. Not even JD Just Dance Vans can save Trump from the disastrous MAPS war he has started. Not even his eyeliner lines look.
So this isn't Gavin Newsom. This is his team, as this guy said. He has a team of people, and they came up with this. And it's working because we're talking about him, right? And they're loving him. Like all the liberal media is loving him. And so he's become the nominee for president for them. And who gives a shit, right? Like in general, this is a little bit funny. Like it's good. Like it's a good thing to do. It's smart. Because Trump is weird and his fucking posts are weird and immature. I loved Trump's post in his first term because these were so not presidential. Like he was making a mockery of the presidency, which drove the fucking media and the liberals and the people who were into the old school Republicans nuts. Because Trump was embarrassing the presidency, the office of the presidency, and being an immature little brat. It was great because it's a fucking joke. Politics is a joke. And they pretend it has all this reverence and, all this decorum, and it's, they're all scumbags. And Trump was just being a scumbag, little baby, narcissistic fuck. But it was great because it was truth,
As pretty as California map lines, he will fail as he always does. Sad, and I, the peacetime governor of our nation's favorite, will save America once again. Many are now calling me Gavin Christopher Columbus Newsom because of the maps. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Beyond the mockery of Trump's text posts, Newsom has also been posting Trump-style AI-generated images of himself, including this, I think, absolute masterpiece of Newsom deep in a moment of reflection or prayer, flanked by 3 MAGA icons and the laying of hands, Kid Rock, who he hates, Tucker Carlson, and the angelic spirit of the recently departed Hulk Hogan. Again, a spot-on mockery of Trump, who isn't doing any of this satirically. What has been equally hilarious has been to watch the joke just go soaring over the heads of Trump's sycophants in the media.
For the last week, Gavin Newsom, why am I giving him advice? You have to stop it with the Twitter thing. I don't know where his wife is. If I were his wife, I would say, "What? You are making a fool of yourself. Stop it. Do not let your staff tweet. And if you're doing it yourself, put the phone away and start over."
A lot of them don't do it themselves. Trump has his own tweets, which you can say are Trump tweets. And they obviously are being proofread. But, Trump's stuff that he put on Instagram, he doesn't do that. Right? But, it's hilarious that Fox News would be saying this because Gavin Newsom is doing a good job. His team is doing a good job of recreating Trump's tweets.
And if he's got a big job as governor of California, but if he wants an even bigger job, he has to be a little bit more serious.
A little bit more serious.
That's right. Be more serious. Stop posting exactly like the President of the United States does. Newsom's account responded to that advice, quote, "Dana Ding Dong Perino, never heard of her until today, is melting down because of me, Gavin C. Newsom. Fox hate that I am America's most favorite governor, ratings king, saving America. Trump has lost his step and Fox is losing it because when I type, America now wins." Thank you for your attention to this matter. Again, it is a stark reminder with someone else doing it of how truly, utterly deranged our current president sounds whenever he communicates.
Yeah, well, it's just because they're all a joke. But anyways, it's effective because he is, trolling is always funny. And it's like memes and shit. It's like, that's the good part of the internet. Because it's all a fucking joke. We're going into the fucking toilet. Our fucking country sucks. And, we're going to collapse 8 different ways. And so none of these things matter. But Gavin Newsom has defined himself, right? like he's already, better than Kamala because he's, he's embracing this. He's taking Trump on. And these guys are lapping it up because they had they have nothing. The Democrats have nothing. And, he's defining himself as his relationship to Trump because Trump is everything. It is fucked up that Trump is everything. These guys center their whole existence around Trump. I mean, it's fucked. It's like totally fucked, right? So let's get to the Tom MacDonald thing in a second, but first this.
Let's talk about Gavin, the governor of California. He is trolling Donald Trump at his own. He's giving him the energy that he's giving out. But first, this is Gavin Newsom on his redistricting plan versus Texas. Here it is.
Okay, so the trolling stuff, Don Lemon is such an idiot. But I've often said this before. When you leave me a comment and you complain about something, make sure you're against the behavior in all forms. Because, if I decide to fucking read your comment and mock you, it's because you're a fucking hypocritical piece of shit. Because I said this when I was mocking Britney Spears. And I got all these fucking comments from these right-wing fucking dopes who are upset saying, oh, she's been abused. She's lived a horrible life and been abused, right? And I'm like, but you didn't have a problem when I was saying the same shit about Lady Gaga or Cardi B, both who claim to be abused themselves, right? Right? So you don't mind the mocking. You just don't like it when it's somebody you fucking like, right? You don't mind the mocking when I'm mocking Joe Biden, but when I mock Donald Trump, you cry like a little bitch, right? And so that's you being fucked up. And it's the same thing here. They hated Donald Trump being mocking and disrespectful and doing his Trump shit. But now that Gavin Newsom's doing it, they love it, right? And whether it's satirical or it's making fun of Trump, they love the behavior and they like that he's taking him on like that and he's demeaning him. Because they don't have a problem with Trump's behaviors. They just don't like that he's winning at it and that, that they can't do it as well. But now that Gavin Newsom, I said the same thing when the senator or the congresswoman from Texas, whatever her name is, said that shit about Marjorie Taylor Greene having a bad beach blonde butch body. And then everyone's like, oh my God, she fucking slammed Marjorie Taylor Greene and they were celebrating it. But it's like, well, I thought you had a problem with that kind of behavior. You didn't like Marjorie Taylor Greene's behavior, right? So like, what happened? And so this is how fucked up the left is because they now have, if they had their own Trump, they would be psyched, but it has to be different for them because they think of themselves as being educated or whatever. But this lowbrow shit, they're liking it. And so, this is the hypocrisy. But then there's Tom fucking MacDonald. So Tom MacDonald is trying to be a truther rapper, but he's a right-wing piece of shit from Canada. His rap sucks. There's, Chris Webby, other rappers who would do a better job of putting truther things out there. But Tom MacDonald sucks and is a right-wing piece of shit. And so, like I said, his rap is off-putting. So he came out this thing called The Devil is a Democrat and Lives in California. There he is, fucking doing his fucking thing and putting his gun out. And he's got this here. He's got Newsom, right? And Gavin Newsom is a fucking J.C. Penney model looking motherfucker who's a slimy piece of shit who's run California into the ground. But he's no different than Trump. She's like the Democrats' version of Trump, who is being rewarded for fucking being a failure. And so Tom MacDonald, I saw something from, there he is there. And I saw something from, I get these Twitter updates from Lorena what's her name? I'll think of it. Juanita Broadwick, who I don't even know if she posts her own shit. She was supposedly abused by Clinton. And she's a big Trumper and whatever. And I always click on it because it's always fucked up shit, and then sometimes I use it. So look, these are all the tweets that he did, but he did this tweet coming up here. I dissed Gavin Newsom. And this is all his whole Twitter page. And like fucking, he's got something there with, whatever it is. There they go there. The devil is a Democrat. There's him putting gas on the fire. There he is, doing that ad there. Somebody in drag there, whatever it is. And Hillary Clinton. And so let me find the tweet here. There's more of that thing there. All right, here it is.
So, as many of you may have seen, Gavin Newsom called me gay on X this morning. I think
There it is right there. Bro, we get it, but it's not interested. Stick to Grinder. Well, he's not interested. Stick to Grinder. So he called him gay.
on X this morning. I think he's just mad that the song I wrote about him, The Devil is a Democrat, is currently #1. But Gavin, you don't have to be mad. You've got lots of #1s too. California's #1 in homelessness. It's also #1 in unemployment. And who could forget it's #1 in totally preventable forest fires. You're crushing it, bud.
I really dislike this piece of shit, right? Because he's smart enough to know. I mean, either he's a dumb fuck, which I know he's not. He's smart enough to know that Trump's a piece of shit. Like, every fucking person who claims to be a truther should know that Trump is a piece of shit that's running the country into the ground and doing the opposite of truther shit. That he's fucking butt buddies, but perv bros with Jeffrey Epstein. Called Jeffrey Epstein a terrific guy, and now has blocked the Epstein files, which is all of his people, except for him, like all his cabinet members and his own son, were saying need to be released, but he fucking failed on that, right? You know, all the stuff I've covered. And his handling of Israel and what he's done there, being owned by Israel. Anybody with any fucking trutherism, being a truther, would call Trump a piece of shit. You know, if you backed him and you did all these things, it would be, you know, I mean, you would be a little bit hesitant, but like, you know you're wrong. And this guy should know that. If you're really a truther, because you're not. You're a poser. You're a fake fuck. Let's go forward here.
It, bud. Gavin, I think you're just mad that
the devil lives in California. He a politician.
He a politician. The devil is a shitty rapper. And so the devil lives in California. He's a politician. His song's #1 because this motherfucker is pandering to dumb fucks. It's like all the truthers or all the people that knew that the earth wasn't flat and knew that that was some bullshit, fucking biblical bullshit, and they embraced it so that they could get fucking money and they could get, you know, whatever they got from of some run on the internet. Like, I could embrace dumb fucks too, you know, but it's to me the worst thing to encourage people's stupidity, right? So, like, he knows that Trump is a fucking piece of shit. And if Gavin Newsom's the devil, then Trump's the devil. I mean, they're both demons. They're both big ego fucking pieces of shit. They're both demonic. I wouldn't say the devil because whatever. Like, I don't even know what the devil is in terms of, like, everybody's a potential demon. But to say that the devil is in California, he's doing this just so that dumb fucks will buy his record. And he did this as a way to fucking, milk as much as possible out of the dumb fucks that still follow Trump. And yeah, you got a #1 song, but the song sucks and you suck. And you're a lying piece of shit. You're not a truther in any way, shape, or form. You're opposite of the truthers. And by them doing this, by Fox News covering Gavin Newsom, and by him doing this thing here, he is anointing Gavin Newsom as the new fucking front-running candidate. They've made him into the front-runner. Gavin Newsom, his thing worked. His trolling has worked, right? Because these right-wing fucks have taken the bait, and they don't give a shit because, he's helping Gavin Newsom by doing this. He's not hurting him. And so the more people that post hate, if Gavin Newsom becomes the new Hillary, that emboldens Newsom for doing whatever he's going to do in the Democratic Party, and he's going to be the candidate. And so it's all fucking lies, right? And this kind of piece of shit, pandering to dumb fucks, downgrading the truth community. All these people that came into the truth community and fucking wrecked it, to what it is now. And then he gets lots of run from YouTube. Like this guy fucking, gets promoted all over the place in YouTube, right? And this, video and all these things. But people like me who do real truth or shit are being hidden away because they want people like this. They want people that pander to dumb fucks. They want people who divide and are dishonest, right? The shitty fucking music.
Keep passing bills that bring chaos and division. Yeah.
Yeah, like who? Who else does that? Trump? He passes bills that bring chaos and division. He just sucks so bad as a rapper.
The devil lives in California.
He lives in California, the devil does. There he is right here, Gavin Newsom. He's in California. You dumb fucks. Buy my records. People who know that they're lying to dumb fucks. And like whether you're a pastor and you're a politician or you're a fucking piece of shit rapper like this guy. When you purposefully lie just to get fucking more of the like whatever fame and money, then don't call yourself a truther. Just call yourself a piece of shit, right? That you pander to dumb fucks that are full of shit. Like Gavin Newsom, why? Because he started tweeting about Trump? And he has a goal and agenda. Newsom wants to be the fucking president in 2028. And this is how his team's going about it. And it's fucking working, right? You're all nominating this guy. He's now the front runner. And his, who do you think's going to win the nomination? Right now, you'd say Newsom. He's going to be the Democratic nominee. And everybody that, it's like when a rapper goes after somebody, another rapper, and usually they've worked on it, they're doing it collaboratively. When they have these bullshit rap beefs, when two rappers are dropping albums and they go after each other, it benefits the other rapper, right? And so when you're a shitty little rapper, just like people will talk shit about you on the internet, like, someone posts a video, like, say, going after me, and I used to respond to them, but it was always these people who had shitty little channels. And I realized there was some guy who posted a whole video about me, and this whole fucking guy was this cartoon thing. I don't even know if the thing exists anymore, or the guy's channel. But I looked at his channel and had 200,000 subscribers. But I looked at his comments and his other shit, and it was all fucking fake content, like all fake comments. And I made a video slamming the guy, and then I deleted it because I didn't want to promote the fucking guy. That's why he was doing it. He wanted me to say something back to him so my audience would look at his shit or whatever it was. And so, like, you're actually helping people. They're going after you because they hope that you'll mention their name, right? They hope that you'll have some kind of a fucking thing about it. And so it's mutual. These are, these two people that the left-right, cover, like AOC and MGK, Marjorie Taylor Greene, MTK, Marjorie Taylor, MTG, AOC and MTG are, they're helping each other out. They give each other material and they get the thing going. And now Gavin Newsom's doing this with Trump, getting whatever he's getting from, the Trumpers, but also from the liberal media. And so, this piece of shit here, don't pretend to be a fucking truther. You're a fake fucking poser that's making fucking bank on fucking pieces, dumb fucks who can't see through the Trump bullshit, right? You're taking advantage of their fucking, it's like taking advantage of handicapped fucking people, right?
Should be in prison. He got horns, but he tries to keep them hidden.
He tries to keep them hidden. He's got horns. Anyway, so that's his fucking song. And it's number one because, of course it is, because dumb fuck Trumpers will lap this shit up because they're too stupid to realize Trump fucked them. And he isn't who he pretended to be. Trump's an elitist pedo who's best buddies with Jeffrey Epstein, and he's owned by Israel and the banks and the fucking powerful people that they're supposed to be against. And he said America first, but he's going to commit troops to fucking Ukraine and other things. And whatever he's done with Israel certainly isn't America first. He's going to run this country into the ground, and Gavin Newsom will do the same thing. They're two of the same guy. They're people who are good at selling themselves even after a resume of complete failure. Okay, still Wednesday, August 20th. It's been an eventful day. Went to the dentist, the more holistic dentist. And it got some stuff to do with that. And I said goodbye to my son, which was a little bit sad. So I want to talk about those two things briefly here, and then get back to I went to the Tom MacDonald stuff and all the stuff to do with that guy, Gavin Newsom. I'm over this whole thing, like like all of it. But let me just say this. So my son leaving, we had a good goodbye or whatever it was. We talked about his plans and all this stuff. He said he appreciated all that we did for him, and it wasn't going to be like the other kids. He'd try to stay in touch, and we'd maybe do some things together, which was positive, and hopefully that'll happen. But just in terms of timing, we just don't have much time, and I'm sure he'll be busy, and so. But whatever, it is what it is. I mean, it got more and more like the kids were living separate lives, and we were all living in the same house, and we'd come together for less and less activities. I mean, when we were we came back from India, they were off with their friends in India quite a bit. And we did a lot of things on the farm before that, had a lot of family time. And, which was good and bad. I mean, for all the stuff with my ex and all this stuff. But when we got back to America, we went hiking once, twice a week. We went to the movies together, and then that's just sort of faded away. And then less and less outing time, less and less doing things as a family. And then they decided not to go on trips with us, those things. And so it just fell away. And, we didn't really eat meals together and things like this. So some holiday stuff. But, there's just a distance that happens now. And there's such a distance now with these generations. The kids are so much different than what we grew up with. But the main thing is, and my son's leaving on a very positive note. Like, he's done better. This is my best time with him. Like, he's a much better person than he was, as a kid. And he's having some success. And, so he's on the up, he's trending upwards, which is good. But, I felt this. I went, took my dogs out, and I was on hold because we have a installation thing that's happening and whatever. And there was a song playing, this country song where this guy was talking about being on hold. And I'm walking around with my dogs, and it's kind of about to rain here. And I kind of just felt like really a lot of sadness. And I really don't know where it's coming from. I mean, there's, the early parts of my kids' lives when they were young, and there was a lot more potential, and we were just starting to build the farm, and we were milking cows and doing things together in terms of building buildings and doing farmer stuff and doing fences together, and the kids were helpful, and they were into it. And, then things kind of just went south. We lived in this house that was like a haunted house. The woman who lived there before, it was listed as a suicide, but people showed up and said she was murdered. There was a whole thing there. And the house had good energy at times, but other times didn't. And my ex really flipped out there, and, things just went south. My ex would get into these suicidal modes or self-abusive modes and cut herself and threaten suicide and, these things. And, just there was so much more than that. It's just whatever. I've talked about this in the Journey series. But anyways, things just kind of went south there. And I was talking about this. There was a kid in the first treatment center I worked at, and he was a kid who he was sexually abused by his mom, and he was in treatment centers for probably 4 or 5 years already. He was like 10 years old. Probably got taken out of the house when he was 5 or 6. His mom would call up, and she would say, something like, Bobby. I had to listen into one of these calls, and I said, I'm never going to do that again. If I have to do that again, I'm going to quit. Like, she had to be on supervised calls, and she just said the kid's name for 15 minutes and wept. She was from some foreign country. English wasn't her original language. And, she had sexually abused her son, and he was all fucked up. And, the kid was going nowhere. And I've talked about this kid, and he ended up in timeout one time, and I used to do the 9 o'clock prayer. I keep my eyes open, but I do the prayer while the kid was in timeout. And they always would settle. It was kind of a neat thing. I was just starting to do the practice. And the 9 p.m. prayer, you pray for everyone to come to spirituality. And the energy just would shift, and the kid would just sort of settle down. And this was a tough kid who, he wasn't physically tough. He didn't get restrained, but he was, tough personality. Like he was, no vulnerabilities, and just, he was just hardened from being in years of growing up in the treatment centers and growing up around other sex offenders. It's a tough thing. And he just started crying. And I asked him, he had a visiting resource, and it got complicated. And I've told this story before. She had a son his age, and she wasn't supervising him. She thought about adopting the kid, but chose not to. And then he was, that was his one thing. It got taken away from him. And he said, I just want a family that loves me. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm going to get my master's in counseling, and, I'm going to be a preceptor in these things for Saj Marg. But, I realized that you really can't help these kids because what everybody needs is like a family that loves them. There's so few people capable of love anymore, and, everything's based in materialism. But, that's what everybody needs, and, having a natural loving family. And, I had this realization that if I really wanted to make the world a better place, I'll have a really good family. And, of course, I read that stuff about with Master Charji about these souls being born into these places and these families. And then you're working with higher developed souls. These kids in the treatment center were very low vibrational, often not very smart. You're working with people who are more degraded, not capable of abstract thought, right? They're on a lower level. And, most of the attention in social services goes to fucked up people, either crazy people or criminal type people. In a classroom, the gifted and talented kids are overlooked because all the time is spent with the kids who misbehave. And it's just a trend I'm not a big fan of. So, I was looking forward to having a family and doing a better job than my parents and my family and having kids who are spiritual. And, the goal was that they would exceed what me and my ex was able to do, especially spiritually. And they would be, if we all had that, if all of our kids were better than us with each succeeding generation, the world would be transformed because we'd be evolving. Our kids would be going past what we had done, especially spiritually, but all the rest of it as well. When your kids can become better people than you. But, this generation of kids growing up on the internet and just not having a future and all the indoctrination they get, all the stuff, there's not really much of a chance of that. Even if they are indigo kids or they're kids with higher potential, they're so limited based on what there's available to them. And, of course, I didn't know that Saj Marg was going to crap out, the heartfulness thing with Daji. And so, there's just a lot of shit that I didn't know was going to happen. I didn't know my ex would get so bad. I didn't know everything would fall apart, all these things. I had no way of knowing, and you can't know. Like, you have to go through things with all, hope and faith that things are going to work out, and, they really didn't, so. But it was, it's a huge chunk of my life, and I don't know, it represents something where, I don't feel disappointed. I have felt disappointed. Really bummed out about it. And, a lot of it is kind of a nightmare in different ways. But I've reconciled it. I've been able to be grateful for it. I've gained from it at least. Everyone else is as well, but I certainly benefited from all the things that happened, all the things that I personally went through, the difficulties. It helped change me and make me into a better person, helped give me, move me forward on my spiritual path. And so I'm cool with it. I don't think about it as some kind of bad thing. My wife and I have plans, we're working on our homestead, and, maybe there'll be gratefulness gatherings. Whatever it is. It's like I'm already set on this stage of my life. I know I have 20 to 30 years left, and, whatever good years are in there, I don't know physically and all those things. And, that kind of, this stage of my life is kind of set up for success for whatever it is that I'm going to be able to do in these last so many years. Mentally, I'm not bummed. Plus, it's, it's a box you have to check. You got to get your kids out of the house, even if you want your kids in the house, even if you want to, keep them there, you have to get them out. They have to go out and do their own thing. Kids living in their houses till they're 30 and 40. It's it's not a positive thing. They have to go out and live their lives. And, so, it's something that has to happen. I feel some sense of relief, but the sadness is there. And I think it's more about, it's just the end of this time. And it's not it didn't work out so great in terms of the family itself. Like I had hoped my kids would at least be connected to each other and have a good sibling relationship. And that didn't happen either. The whole thing, right? It's just, Master Chargy, the third master of the Sizemore system, the guy that I was there for the meditation. He had said a house without children is like a dead house. And, the house is peaceful, and I feel like the energy in the house now, it's been getting, it's gotten better over the years with, all these things. And, my son was on the computer a lot playing video games and things, and that's brings a certain energy into the house. But, I understand what Chargy meant by that, the laughter and play that kids have and having, if not kids, grandkids running around and, they bring life and energy, potential, enthusiasm and things that kids have. Of course, kids are different nowadays. For Chargy, his mom died when he was 5, and then his family just got depleted. His maternal side fell on bad luck. His mom was sort of like the jewel of the family, and she, when she passed away, the whole family went south, and they had a lot of deaths, and somebody has to light the pyre, the funeral pyre that they burned the body on. And Chargy had to do it like 15, 16 times in his life. Maybe 9, I don't know. So it was quite a bit. Like there was other people that should have done it, but they weren't there. And he kept on having to do it. Then, he had one son and he had a couple of grandkids. And now I think his grandkids have babies and, these things. And so he was, happy to see that there was, life in the house brought in by these young kids. But, I worked with kids for so much. I mean, I was a kind of, a man-child when I was in my 20s, 30s, and doing things that were, playing sports and doing things that were more kid-oriented. And I worked with kids in treatment center and had the kids that I raised. And at some point, it's just, you move on to something else. I mean, it's nice to work with adults. You spend too much time around kids. Just like any other population, it wears on you. And people who are school teachers and, work with kids for all this time. Of course, I work with kids who are, deviant criminal type people, sex offenders, and, they're going to be, just institutionalized, the dregs of society. At some point, you just get an aversion to all that shit. Like it's just too much with one population, and you want to move on. And, my kids, of course, were older now in their 20s. But, even that, the generational gap and the difference in generations and, all these things, it's hard to have any kind of communication with younger people because your lives and your experience is so different. Usually people at my stage of life want to be around grandkids and stuff. And there aren't any, and, I don't have much of a relationship with my own kids. So that really isn't going to be something in the future. Like I said, I'm kind of burned out on it, but something, there is that element where as an older person, you want to teach younger people, you want to pass things on to them the best you can. But that just might not be there for me, and I'm kind of okay with it. So anyways, so that's happened. That door has closed, the stuff with my kids, and now it's, a different sort of a lifestyle. And so the other thing is I went to the dentist, and he had a radiologist look at my dental work, and no sign of infection. The radiologist did not say anything that would say there was infection. The tooth had moved a little bit. I could read what exactly they wrote, but my teeth, they're saying there's bone loss, and the guy recommended I go to a periodontist who would put in these things, these artificial, bone stuff between the gums, and so there's a whole thing there, and I have to think about that. So it was mostly good news, but my regular dentist had said there was bone loss, but didn't recommend I go to a periodontist, which shows what a piece of shit he was. And they don't have any other way to do it. I want to look at some other things. But anyways, that's it for the dental thing. I'll do an update on that later. So going back to this thing with Tom MacDonald, Trump, and Gavin Newsom, there's this idea, are you going to try to elevate your audience? Or are you going to pander to their lower nature? Right? So this is a big deal. When you have an audience, are you going to be honest with them? Or are you going to manipulate them, and how are you going to treat your audience? And, I came across this. I had to make decisions about this. So, when I first started making videos, I would look for pictures, like if I was saying some Michelle Obama or some actress was a man, or could possibly be a man, I would choose the photos that made, that where she looked like a man the most. But there were other photos where she didn't, and I would ignore those photos. And I realized that I was being a piece of shit, right? Because that's being fundamentally dishonest. You're only showing half the information. You're gaming the data to prove your point, to support whatever you think is going on. And so, I realized that I wanted to be honest. Like, if I had to be honest, then I had to, think about, that there is possibilities of other explanations, and not just lock into one explanation that was supported by other people in the truth community, and just look at things in a more objective way, and give, other points of view and whatever it might be, and make a distinction between what's fact and what's speculations. Because a lot of people announce like they know, and I know they don't know because I know they're wrong, because they don't see what needs to be seen, right? There's a lot of, arrogance in the truth community and on the internet in general. The other thing was, there was a day I came home I was out, and I had a little bit of a migraine, and I came home, and there was some guy who was a truther. I didn't know who he was. And he had copied one of my videos. And I copyrighted it, and he got a copyright strike. And he was in the process of losing his channel because he had 2 other copyright strikes. So he made a video about me and how I was trying to take away his channel, and I was some kind of a piece of shit and not a real truther. And I was bombarded by fucking comments from his dumbass fucking followers. And some of those same people were also people who watched my videos. So they watched both of our videos, right? And, he had some of my videos on his channel. And he accused me of doing it like maliciously, and I was just trying to take down another truther. And it was just all fucking bullshit. I didn't even know who he was. Because I had a number of people that would steal my videos and make money on them. There's one guy who was a foreign guy, and he would copy my Illuminati videos. I did some Illuminati thing on Beyonce at the Grammys, and he copied the video, and my video got 250,000 views. This is before YouTube started, with their bullshit algorithms. And he got 300,000 views. And, his title was better because even back then, they were starting to censor our titles and things, so I had to, but whatever it was, that guy was making a lot of money off my video. And, so these people are just stealing my videos, right? And this other guy had done that, and I didn't know who the fuck he was. And somebody had probably sent me the video because I didn't find these things on my own. And so I filed a copyright thing, and the guy got a strike. And he already had 2 strikes because he was stealing people's videos left and right. And he decided to make up a bunch of bullshit that I was purposely going after him. And I got all these hateful comments from dumbass fucking truthers. And it was the worst kind of day because I was low energy and I had a migraine. And I had to, fish through all this bullshit. I had to make videos about what a piece of shit this guy was. And it was at that same time I was talking about earlier, my last voiceover, about when, my kids and I went camping. Because my wife and I were just first together. And she went to the guy's channel and found another video he had stolen that he had also monetized. And he said he didn't monetize the video, but I saw that he did. He was making money off of my fucking content, stealing a whole video. And, it wasn't cool because I wasn't giving anybody permission to do that. I was 100% in the right. But then all these people came in and, and I was like, what a bitch move it was for him to run to his fucking followers because his channel was getting taken down from his own fucking bad actions. And we went back and forth, but, he was 100% in the wrong. We both were making videos about it. And eventually he came like a week later and wrote me an email apologizing and asking me please to take off the copyright strike, which he could have done in the fucking beginning. And I would have said, don't do my fucking videos anymore. Don't take my videos. And that would have been it. But instead he, bitched out and he manipulated his audience. And I saw that people were doing that quite a bit in the truth community, where truthers would get upset about something or somebody, and they'd send their fans over to fucking troll people. And it's just a bullshit fucking thing to do. I mean, I don't support that anyway. Telling people what a piece of shit they are doesn't help you. And it says something about you. When I talk about people, I'm not saying it to them. Like anybody that I talk about here, I mean, if they watch my video, they watch my video, but they're not my intended audience. Because telling people they suck almost never results in them changing. Occasionally, if a person's in a weakened position or something. But, you have to understand when you start having a following, you're responsible to your audience and you want to elevate them And, you want to get as many people as possible by pandering to their lower nature and using emotion like Alex Jones and so many of these other bullshit truthers. And they also do it on the left. People who get all riled up and get people riled up. And knowing that the people are wrong, but telling them that you agree with them just so that you can build more of a fan base and you can merch out, you can get their fucking dumb fuck money. You're in for the dumb fuck money. And I'm pretty sure Tom MacDonald knows that Donald Trump is just as much a piece of shit as Gavin Newsom. And he knew that by making this video, that this song that sucks, because he sucks as a rapper, he would get a lot of love from the right-wing fucking fuckheads. But, you're not helping them out. You're not, and you're lying to them, right? You know you're lying to them. And certainly what Gavin Newsom is doing, Gavin Newsom comes out much more as an intellectual. He's polished. He's got the fucking J.C. Penney model thing going on and a fucking slicked back fucking mullet hair bullshit thing he does. Just very unlikable. But he's doing this thing to troll Trump, which is effective, and it does, bring attention to Trump doing these fucked up things. The way Trump communicates. But he's embracing the darkness, like he's, it's low level, narcissistic, all these things. I mean, I'm never against funny trolling, in one sense, but it means you have to go to this kind of a level, and it's just like it's degrading the whole thing, and which is great. Like it's not some politics is gross. It's just so as gross as anything else. It's of a lower nature, lower vibrational nature. There's no higher element to it. There's no higher calling. It's not a godly pursuit. If you become a politician, you have to fight to keep your connection with God, because politics is very ungodly, especially, kind of political system we have and the kind of people that are involved with it. It's just, egoism and evil and demonic shit. But, in all that, it's going to the lowest common denominator. And people are fucking aware of this, and I'm aware of it. If I wanted to make a lot of money, I could pander to a bunch of dumb fucks and tell them I agree with them and tell them how great they are. And I could do it in a way that would make them feel good, and, and because it would sound like it comes from somebody who's, able to articulate things the way I can or whatever it is. But, it's just a fucked up thing to do, right? You should be ennobling people. You should be pulling people up to a higher level. And, anybody who doesn't do that is a piece of shit. Like it's, we're going down fast, and to dishonestly, pander to people's lower nature is just a fucked up thing. That's why Tom MacDonald's a piece of shit, and the rest of these people are, because, that's what they do. I briefly watched CNN. I was eating lunch, and I don't know if it was MSNBC or CNN. I think it was CNN. And they were talking about this thing with Gavin Newsom and him trolling. And one guy said, he's positioning himself now. And they were talking about how all the other politicians are probably jealous of this thing he's doing, because he's putting his stamp on the thing. He's, by becoming Trump's target, every time Trump says Newsom's name, it gets more and more likely that Newsom will win the Democratic nomination. So, and when Tom MacDonald and these fucking Fox News, Fox say his name, and CNN and MSNBC are giving him all this, they're saying he's sucking up all this oxygen. But this other guy said he runs the risk of people not understanding that he's being sarcastic and just basically saying everyone's a dumb fuck, right? He's talking about the Democrats, that they might not understand what he's doing and whatever it is. And so, like it's just everyone's headed towards the fucking the abyss. Everybody's diving straight into hell, and they can't wait to get there. Anyways, let me wrap this one up here. I'm just a little bit tired. People don't want to know about their higher nature, and the people that have power and influence don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about personal responsibility. They don't want to talk about any of the things that people need to hear. And therefore, everything's going to shit. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paramount, definitely points for the apocalypse and the ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.